Hello all, I hope you're doing well today. We've seen a lot in recent months on the topic of civil war, many people predicting it in Britain and other countries in Europe and the Western world as well. And you can see this is a hot button topic because these videos get millions of views. And I think if you watch some of them, they're a little bit fantastical, maybe they're just riding the algorithm for the clicks and the views. But some people are making genuine observations, and as I say, given they get such a big response, it almost goes to show that people can sense something in the waters at the moment. I do wonder if this could be part of the reason why Keir Starmer's done such massive U-turns on his policies when he came in. I mean, he had a terrible start to his premiership, didn't he? I mean, it was just awful. And the latter part of his premiership, he's just reversed everything. So no longer have we got this talk of the far right being a menace. He's decided to give the winter fuel payments to the old folks again. And he himself has been engaging in, quote, far-right rhetoric when it comes to immigration with his Island of Strangers speech. Now, I don't think anybody's actually falling for this. It's quite depressing how our politicians see us like pawns, really, and we'll just fall for whatever they say. And it's this idea, they're not really leaders. They're sort of managers of the globalist liberal system, which is why I think some people have suggested they'd be happier with a dictator who actually loves Britain and loves the British people than the democracy we have now. And do you know what? I can kind of get where people like that are coming from. I mean, we're not really ruled by people who have any affinity with us at all. They're metro liberals, managerial types who don't really see a distinction between Ahmed from Pakistan or John Smith from Worksop. Their only consideration is who's cheaper and who'll be less of a fuss for the system. That's it, so they don't really care. And they think it's racist to even say, should the British government be more loyal to John Smith over Ahmed in Pakistan? But this is the state we're in, and then they wonder why we're getting these instances of mass civil disobedience across the country. Now, I have to say this, and again, it sums up the state of modern UK. I'm not pro this civil disobedience. I'm not promoting it in any way. Don't get involved. But again, this sums up the problem. They're so draconian with people who just want to talk about things. But when there's real problems in the country, they just don't care. Because again, it doesn't affect them directly, which says something about these protests. They're directly undermining what's supposed to be the multicultural liberal utopia. And they wonder why these are happening. Despite destroying our traditional culture, destroying our communities, they've made a mess of the country. They've rendered it a soulless economic zone. And it's only really kept alive by the £1 billion marketing campaigns about how great multiculturalism is and how wonderful everything is in modern Britain. Don't believe what you actually see. Look at the TV screen, that sort of thing. And they try and almost, comatose us these days with the varying forms of hedonistic novelty. Oh my God, you won't believe Manchester United have signed another 60 million Brazilian player. Oh, what are they going to do next season? They need to get Ruben Amorim out. Yeah, whatever. Now, I'm not saying that because I don't like football. I'm just sick of it being used as something which is essentially like a pacifier to stop us realising what's going on. And it's the same with so many of the things in this day and age. Anyway, back to the case in point. Ballymena in Northern Ireland is the latest example, which I think behind all of this is summing up a new era. I don't think it's so much civil war that we're at the foot of. I think it's a new era, and I'll explain what I mean. Now, firstly, as an overview, I'm sure most of you are aware, but if you're not, the Ballymena issue to me seems to be the classic modern day problem. So there's mass civil disobedience. The liberal mainstream, the BBC types, this is just the far right whipping up, they love that word, whipping up, concern over mass immigration. It's just some evil racists, coming in and manipulating the stupid people of Ballymena because they're so thick. All it needs is, a few Tommy Robinson types or whoever else. And they're now protesting and rioting and nothing else to see here. Stupid racists as always. However, and again, I'm not condoning the rioting, but it seems to me there's some crossover with the riots in England last summer. In essence, it's a forgotten working class community, highly patriotic, who are concerned by mass immigration and have been ignored for years and 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 been called racist and stupid and told to shut up. And now it's bubbling over. And again, I'm not condoning their actions, I'm not pro the riots, but you can see that there's more going on here than the liberal mainstream would wish to tell you. This is why they say, it's just been whipped up over, one event. Of course, they said it was just lies about Southport in England. It was just a lie that this was a Muslim. That's all it was. Of course, it turned out that they were lying. It wasn't exactly a Welsh choir boy. And in Northern Ireland, apparently there was a sex attack by a migrant or something like that. So you can imagine the liberal mainstream saying, you don't care about all the, the white Irish or British, however they see themselves over there, who are committing sex crimes. You only care because it's a migrant, you're racist, back to square one with them. But the point they want to ignore and must ignore by necessity is these issues are decades in the making. And they speak to fractures which aren't whipped up by the far right, but are quite natural. But the liberal system has just done a woeful job of addressing because it doesn't want to address them. Because again, they don't really care about John Smith in Worksop or Ahmed in Pakistan. Or we could say John McGinley in Northern Ireland or Ahmed in Pakistan. To them, it just doesn't matter. They're interchangeable. They're both batteries for the system. Who cares? What are you, a racist? So again, you can see that this has just been building and building and building. And I've said before that if they actually tried in some genuine way for some sort of transcendent tradition that could unite people of different groups, some form of perennialism or something, maybe I could think, at least they're trying, to integrate people. But they never do, because all they care about is left-wing ideology, which they use to push the interests of international finance capital. So again, does this mean civil war? I don't think it means civil war, and I'll explain why. I think it means we're going to see much more civil disobedience, but I don't think civil war. First of all, I think communities are just too diffuse in this day and age. Too many people want too many different things. It's hard to organise a group en masse. Even amongst, let's say, the British people themselves, there's just massive disagreement. You'll get some people on the right who are just massively concerned about what's going on, and that will be met by quite a loud voice on the left who think, you're all racist, we need to oppose you in the streets, and they're going to have all the backing of the state as well. Second to that, the state is just too draconian. I mean, we saw this with the riots in England, and we're probably going to see it again in Ballymena. They just come down on people engaged in rioting, promoting rioting, like a ton of bricks. I mean, we've all seen the examples of, Lucy Connolly, the Tory MP's wife who's in jail for 3 years. I mean, it's outrageous, that. It's so sad. I mean, look, she said a stupid thing online. She shouldn't have said it. But it's at a time of, again, very, very high emotion. And they put her in jail for 3 years. And now, of course, there are examples of people coming out who've been committing horrendous sex crimes and all sorts of brutal things that have been done by all sorts of criminals. And they're getting, 24 weeks and all this sort of stuff. And, of course, it's easy to see the system wants to make a note of people like Lucy Connolly. But you might say, well, that's just the state and they can't jail everyone. Well, the thing is, this is where we get to the real key point about it being in a new era, in my view, of course. Let me know if you disagree down below. But I think some of us are still in the mindset that this is contained in Britain, the British people and the British state, if you will. But I think that's not exactly the case. I think what's behind the state is really the full muscle of the globalist system. So even if the British state started to crumble a little bit, what we'll see is the real power behind the throne will start to come through. And I could even see, other nations' armies getting involved because the globalist liberal power structure controls the Western world. So even if it got that out of hand, it would still be put down by something international. I don't even think it would get that far anyway, personally. But my point is, this is the new era I'm talking to. It's understanding the true nature of power. It's bigger than just our election cycle. It's bigger than Britain. We are part of the international market now, and we are basically controlled by the wants and needs of that market. So when we speak about things like civil war, I think that, civil disobedience maybe, but it's too hard to organise a people. And secondly, the real question is, how do we actually come up against this overarching system? How would that even be defeated, if it could be? Well, I don't think it could be defeated, but I think it could collapse. This whole thing of fractional reserve banking, the myth of modernity, we've reached the end of history, this is the way the world's going to be now, eternal liberal multiculturalism, and this sort of neoliberal economics, that's a myth. It's a myth of the liberal system, and if we can't think outside of it, it shows we're just completely lost in liberal modernity. everything falls apart. The Roman Empire fell apart, communism fell apart, the British Empire fell apart. All empires and power structures end eventually. And it seems to me the reason why the Brits, as well as many people across the Western nations, and arguably other nations as well, are sensing this change has collapsed is because it's the broader system that's starting to run out of steam. Now, it can keep itself artificially inflated, which is what we're almost seeing with Britain at the moment. Our economy is artificially inflated by millions and millions of these cheap third world workers and so on, as we turn into basically a service industry who don't build anything. But we're starting to see the very soul of what we are is being eaten alive as our debt increases exponentially. So to me, it feels like the broader system is starting to crumble. And what does that mean? Well, I think this means, on the counter, we're going to see a whole raft of new loyalties, of new regions, of new understanding of our own tradition, people and religion. I think that is the future. It's not going to be the world of old. And if we think it is, we're still stuck in the liberal mindset. Now, this is a case in point on your screen right now. Sorry about the footage being very shaky. But you can see here's a guy with an Irish flag and another fella with a Northern Irish flag. And they're in Northern Ireland, and clearly they're walking down the road together. And I think this is part of the new world that's coming. We're going to let go of old arguments because we're going to realise we have a common enemy which is bigger than all of us. And I'm seeing this happening already. I mean, for instance, think about our grandparents and the enmity they might have towards the French or the Germans. You know, do you have that? I don't. I don't really care if someone's French in London or German. I see them as like pretty close to me now. After the Boris wave, you know, these people are not pretty much, you know, not that different at all. They speak English, they're perfectly friendly, they understand our culture, we understand theirs. You know, our differences are minuscule compared to what's going on and what the system is doing. And I think this is going to be the real challenge of the future. You know, and it's going to be a re-understanding of who and what we are in a much broader context. That might even be pan-European. You know, a lot of people speak about nationalism in this day and age. I'm almost inclined to think in a more continentalist type way, because we have to realise we're all in the same boat. England, France, Germany, Poland, America, Canada, Australia. And I think we've got more in common. And if we stand together as a people and say, do you know what? We want to maintain Western culture. We are the people who've been gifted this by our ancestors. We don't hate anyone. We don't wish anybody unwell. We don't want violence. But this is our home and this is our culture and we'd like to maintain it. We realise we actually have a shared purpose. And that, I think, is the real challenge to globalism. And that's why it wants to put down those unions between people. It's the battle, really, between tradition versus modernity, you know, or continentalism or nationalism versus globalism, you know, the huge issues of our age. And again, I think that it even comes down to there's a spiritual context to all of that. You know, are we just simply in materialist modernity? Is that it? You know, the economy rules all and ideology rules all. Or are we part of something deeper? Do we have mythologies, symbologies? Do we hark back to something beyond ourselves? These are the big questions of the new era. And I don't think these things have to be forced either. The great thing about real change is it's natural. You know, and I think this change that we're seeing in Britain, in Ireland, in France, across the Western world is formating naturally. And that is, you know, something to be, I think, aligned with rather than argued for. You don't have to argue these things because they awaken by themselves. So these are my views on the future of not just the UK, but Europe and the broader Western world. I'd be interested to know what you think down below. I don't think any of this is going to happen overnight. I think this is going to be decades in the making, but I do think it's the likely outcome for the long term in the rest of the century. Of course, if you are interested in the spiritual and personal transformation side of that, do check out my channel, The Sacred Way, down below. Other than that, let me know your thoughts in the comments and do subscribe to the channel if you're new. Enjoy the rest of your day.